Hello and welcome to the Nature Garden Podcast with me, Carl Steinson, and the weekending show team from Lionheart Radio. It's a chance to take a wander down the garden path and country lane with the birds and the bees and the flowers and the trees, and an opportunity to hear stories from the past and present. In this episode, if you're like me and get a bit confused about pruning, Tom Pattinson has a brief guide on why, how and when to trim your shrubs and bushes. Steve Lowe is on top of the world on a 15th century Pele Tower that's being restored. And if you'd like the lowdown on eider ducks, Tom Cadwallender's here to tell us all about one of our most distinctive sounding birds. All coming up on the Nature Garden Podcast. Pruning is a gardening job that I thought was dead easy when I started off, thinking I was being careful, only to realise I'd killed a hebe with a mistimed trim. Okay, so I was maybe a bit unlucky to be caught out by a late frost. But don't be feared. Pruning is a brilliant thing to do, and it's good to know the theory behind the process. Tom Pattinson is here to help.
I'm often asked questions about pruning, and in fairness, it can be a confusing aspect of gardening. So I point out we should be thinking about the why, the when, and the how. That's what people want to know, and the why is straightforward for me, because if I look out in the countryside at the moment, I see that the Rosa canina, the dog rose, is developing in the hedgerows as beautiful little single flowers. And there are stems there supporting them, of course. They come up through the hedge and put on growth year on year, and eventually the growth wood becomes aged, and someday it will collapse, and it just lies there while a young shoot replaces it, takes up the burden of flowering every year, and it's not a pretty sight. The young shoot is with the flowers, but not the old one. We can bypass that system in the garden with our secateurs and long-handled pruners by removing old growth as much as possible to keep rejuvenating the plants that we grow. That makes sense, doesn't it? Having said that, there's a little more to it than that. One of the reasons I prune is to get rid of the dead old wood, keep young wood coming. I want to get rid of the damaged stems, those that are diseased, those that are weakly and not strong enough, and those that are overcrowding, congesting the plant. That's fairly straightforward. So when I'm pruning, I've got to look at different techniques. First thing is, do you want light pruning, just to keep a neat sort of natural shape to a shrub, in which case you simply remove the occasional out of place stem that grows. If you want neat, formal hedging or topiary work, then of course it's close cutting, and it's constant 2 or 3 times during the summer. There are also specific techniques you can use with your secateurs to encourage flowers on ornamental shrubs and trees, and to encourage flowers and fruit on fruit trees. So there's a little bit to think about. That's the reasons I have to prune, I guess. Thinking about the when do you prune, well, there are 2 or 3 little things that help me here. Generally speaking, deciduous trees and shrubs that flower before the end of May, and here I'm thinking about forsythia, winter jasmine, possibly the ribes, flowering currant, woodgella and things like that. If they flower during winter and before the end of May, as soon as they've finished flowering, you prune them. Generally pruning the young wood rather than the old wood that's not showing any signs of life. It's a bit dodgy with some trees and shrubs pruning into old wood because they might not respond. Some do willingly, others do not. So how much do you take off? Well, generally speaking, up to 1/3 of the recent new wood you can take off. That gives the plant a chance to rejuvenate, grow new stems, which will ripen before the winter period and the early spring period and flower next year. So, deciduous trees and shrubs that flower after May and June. I'm thinking here of Buddleia, the butterfly bush, Escallonia, Lavatera, and the Buddleia and the Lavatera, Barnsley, they grow from basic, way down near soil level, within a few weeks, up to sometimes 2 meters tall to flower on very new wood, new stems. So the time to cut those down is in the winter. If you're going to prune them in the winter period. Then they have a chance just before spring to stop their growth and flower on those new shoots. The second bit, I suppose, is looking at the evergreens, some of the evergreens. A lot of those, evergreen hedges, etc. Well, mainly in terms of shrubs, broad-leaved evergreens, you prune those if they need any pruning in May and in June each year. And in terms of broad-leaved evergreens, I'm thinking of Elaeagnus, for example. I have one in the garden, lovely variegated shrub, grown for its variegated leaves. Or Cuba japonica, Cuba, the spotted laurel, Fatsia, the false castor oil plant, the cherry laurel, and the Viburnum tinus, the evergreen viburnum. Those sort of things I'm pruning now.
If you're walking along the beach or coastal path, you might hear a rather distinctive call. Some think it's a bit like the late comedian Frankie Howerd. Well, if you have heard that, you'll be familiar with the cuddy duck. Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology can tell us more about the beautiful eider, a bird that is both cute and deadly.
Did you know that the county bird of Northumberland is the eider duck? The eider, what a fantastic species. They're only found by the sea, and they've been around for an awful long time. In fact, the eiders nest on offshore islands, the Coquet and the Farne Islands, and they enjoyed the first bird protection, if you like, created by Saint Cuthbert. Saint Cuthbert, during his sojourn or sabbatical on the islands, he noticed that they were being heavily persecuted, and the eggs were taken and so forth by the local population. So he put his protective wing around them, for example, and he kind of created the first protection laws, and that was in the 7th century. And since that time, they've been known as Cuthbert's duck, sort of locally, and it's quite interesting. But they're distinctive birds. The males and females are different in their plumage. The females are browny, and it's kind of cryptically marked, camouflagey. So she'll sit for about 4 or 5 weeks on a clutch of maybe 5-6 eggs, and she needs to sit tight for quite long periods of time. So that's why she's cryptically marked, so she can hide away there and be unobtrusive. So she's hidden. On the other hand, the male is just a spectacular character, black and white generally, and has this lovely sort of pale green patch at the back of its head, which is used for display purposes. And if you go to any of the harbours that we have on the Northumberland coast during kind of late winter, early spring, sort of February, March time, and you can see them displaying. They'll have this head bobbing thing, and they'll make this noise, this ooh, ooh, ooh sort of noise. Absolutely amazing, really quite captivating, and it's fantastic. Great sight to see, and they really are quite easy to see. And as I mentioned, they've got quite a distinctive head shape with this wedge shape sort of running down to they can apply an awful lot of pressure to the tip of the bill, because they feed on shellfish basically, and they need to be able to crack open the shells, but they do quite well. The birds that we have here are residents, but in the wintertime we see some of the continental birds coming to supplement the population. But don't be fooled by some of the immature birds. they can be sort of, they take a number of years to get full adult plumage, so that they'll go through a variety of motley black and whitey sort of plumages before they get to the full adult stage. But they breed on the offshore islands, Coquet and the Farne Islands, with a few of them, a few nests getting onto mainland. It's quite difficult to tell really how many breed on mainland, because the females will bring the young ducklings, the eider ducklings, across to the inshore waters in a small size. They're tiny when she brings them over. So you see them floating around the estuaries and along the coastline. You think, have they bred locally or not? It's hard to tell. But in the last few years, I have found the odd nest of the eider on the Island estuary. Last year, I found 2 nests, and the year before, I found 1. This year, it looks like it's going to be 3 or 4, perhaps, on the island. But they have this great system of antes, and where the like many duck and other wildfowl species, they will creche. They will bring several families together to look after them. But they have this system where the non-breeding females will help the breeding females to sort of raise the young and act as some level of protection and sort of kind of chaperoning, if you like, the broods that they kind of travel around the estuaries. And it's great to see. And they have this little call, this beep, 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 beep call, which they use to sort of manage the little groups of eider ducklings around the place. And one time I was working on the Northumberland coast, and someone brought me this little eider duckling had got sort of separated from its family. And I'm thinking to myself, what am I going to do with it? But I knew there was a decent group of birds on the Coquet estuary. So I took it down there, and I could see the birds, the eiders being sort of the aunties around the place, sort of looking after shepherding their flock, if you like. And I threw this duckling as hard as I possibly could, and it dropped into the water quite close. And as soon as it hit the water, it made this beep, 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 beep noise. And they quickly gathered it up and actually sort of took it off and took it as their own. It was absolutely fantastic. I felt really very, very, very happy about that, and that bird would have been sort of gathered up and looked after. At least it had a chance anyway at that point. It was great stuff. I loved it. But since in the last few years, there's been a bit of a decline in the population, simply because studies have shown us that coming out of winter, the eiders, the females, are not in good enough condition to raise a big clutch. So the clutch size is going down. So there's not enough, or fewer birds going into the population each year. And it's down to food supply. And as I mentioned, they like to feed on shellfish. And that's their staple diet. I once watched a female eider dismember a crab on the Island estuary, and that was a sight to behold. That she had caught this crab, and she would throw it in the air, and each time she caught it, she would snap one of the legs off. And at the finish, this poor crab didn't have any legs left, and she just swallowed it whole. And it was amazing, actually, that she could do that. It was incredible, amazing thing to see. But anyway, yes, the poor old eider is in a little bit of a decline at the present time, and it's something we should be sort of a little bit concerned about, because it is kind of the county bird of Northumberland, and it's a real shame. But there we are. That's if you get a chance to go out and have a look, eiders are worth looking at.
Pruning may seem like a mysterious art, however, it's just a matter of timing and technique. Here's Tom with some more knowledge and tips on how to pinch and prune.
Well, we've had the why and the when of pruning, and now it's the how. And never start pruning with an instrument that's blunt. If your secateurs are blunt, then you're going to damage the stem tissue very close to the bud, because we prune back to just above a bud, and that's bad news. It lets in pathogens for disease. The idea is to make a cut behind the bud at a slope of 45 degrees, and this allows rain to run off, so the bud remains sound no collection of water in or near it. You can choose which direction a plant goes with its shoots, its branches, if you prune to a bud pointing in that direction. For example, if you have a rose bush and you wanted to send them out to the side, become more bushy, then you prune back to an outward pointing bud, and so on. Fairly straightforward stuff, but it is important. I use my finger and thumbs a lot to prune. It is a form of pruning, and at the moment I'm using them in the greenhouse. I have a tomato crop, and that tomato crop is sending lots of side shoots out at the moment. 1 or 2 trusses of tomatoes have formed, but it just wants to send out as much growth as possible. And that would be robbing the developing fruits of important moisture and food. So every morning I'm rubbing out those side shoots I see developing. Similarly, the grapevine. It has bunches of grapes set now, but it insists on taking over the greenhouse. This is the vine itself, and it keeps on sending out side shoots, laterals, and they are counterproductive. So I'm also doing that every morning. There's a new batch of them, pinching them out right from the source with my finger and thumb. The peach in there is a slightly different matter. The fruits are on now, and I want every piece of energy to go into those fruits, increasing in size and ripening. So all the side shoots the peach plant is sending out, laterals, I'm reducing them with the secateurs on this occasion back to 2 buds from the main stem, or 2 leaf joints if you wish. That's using finger and thumb previously, and it's getting back to finger and thumb. I'm out in the garden now, and I'm going to pinch out the centre of some bedding plants because I see that they are not bushing as I want them to. I want them to be nice and bushy and fill the bed. So you simply pinch out the growing tip of the plant because that's where growth auxins are concentrated. And once you remove that tip, you've removed them from there, and there's activity further down. Shoots below, buds will burst and they'll grow into a bushy fashion. That is important, and this applies to any plant that's developing in straight, tall, and thin. If you want to develop, say, a fuchsia standard, then of course encourage the main central lead stem to go up and rub out all the side shoots with finger and thumb. You can do quite a lot of pruning with that finger and thumb. Going into the garden with the secateurs again, I'm looking at the gooseberry bush, and it's a lovely open goblet-shaped bush. Stems radiating out from the centre, and they've got fruit on board now, but the centre remains open, and that's the way it should be. Every winter when I'm pruning it, deep winter, just before spring, I remove a lot of growth that's unnecessary in the centre. And the reason for that is there is a disease called gooseberry mildew, and if there's not a good flow of air through the centre of the bush, it's congested, you'll get mildew, which ruins the leaves and it ruins the fruit. Also, there's a magpie moth which lays its eggs, and they turn to caterpillars, and those caterpillars can defoliate a gooseberry bush within a week, easily, but I can get access to them if the centre of the bush is open. Raspberries out there as well, soft fruits. I have 2 types of raspberries. I have the main crop, which have fruit on board now. It'll be ripe in 2 or 3 weeks. Then it will last for a month, and then it will fade. I also have autumn fruiting type, and they are just starting to grow from the ground now, but they'll grow up to 2 meters tall sometimes if they're really vigorous, and they'll produce fruit then. So the first type, the main crop, raspberries. When they've finished fruiting, in about late July, maybe into August, I completely cut out every single cane that has borne fruit, right down to the ground, right down to soil level. And then I can see that the young shoots are probably about 30, maybe 60 centimetres tall. Well, I encourage those because they'll grow for the rest of this year, reach probably somewhere between 1 to 2 metres high. The canes will ripen and they'll give me fruit next year. Now, the autumn cropping raspberries. They will produce their fruit. It starts to come about September, and it will continue through October, even into November if the weather is open. Once those autumn fruiting raspberries have finished fruiting, I'll chop them down to the ground level, and you can't see a single sign of anything on that area of the bed. But they start growing in February again, and they grow up to 1 to 2 meters before the end of the autumn, and they start fruiting.
Pele Towers are features of Northumberland, Cumbria and the Scottish borders. They're a bit like mini castles built to protect residents against raids by the border reivers. Pele Towers saved people's lives, and Steve Lowe can tell us about how people are now working together to save Pele Towers. In particular, an at-risk 15th century Pele Tower at Cresswell, Northumberland.
Hi there, this is Steve Lowe. I'm at Cresswell Tower. In fact, I'm actually at the top of Cresswell Tower with the Assistant Project Manager for the restoration here, who's Barry Mead. Hiya, Barry.
Oh, hi, Steve. Thanks for coming along and showing an interest in our brilliant project.
It's fantastic, isn't it? Yeah, the guys are working away there on the roof. How's it going?
It's going brilliantly. Despite the problems we've obviously had with the coronavirus, and there was a temporary suspension of work, Historic Property Restoration are doing the work here, back on site, obviously doing all the social distancing, etc., and really cracking on. As we're standing here, they're beavering away on the roof. The tower, which is 600-700 years old, certainly hasn't had a roof for the last 50-60 years, so it's been exposed to all the elements. Particularly harsh site here right by the North Sea. But yeah, as we're standing here, the main timbers have been put in place, support timbers, so hopefully within the next 2 or 3 weeks we'll actually have the roof covered.
Fantastic. So what's the roof actually being made of then, Barry?
All right, well, on top of the timbers, we're having a material called turn steel, would you believe?
Oh, right.
Any project like this, because this is a listed building and a scheduled ancient monument, we have to work very closely with Historic England, and based on their advice, that's the material that we've got to put on the roof.
Okay, but as you were saying before, when we were having a little look around, you're not going to be able to see this from the ground. It's actually a low-pitched roof, so...
Yes, again, as specified by Historic England, although all the historic photos I've got when there was a roof on this building showed it as having a very steep pitch roof, Historic England have specified the low pitch roof, so that's what we're going for.
That's great, and you'll be able to see that the wood structure from inside as well once the site's open, yeah?
Yes, all being well, this will be open to visitors next year, free admission as well.
Excellent.
To make it as accessible as possible. And when they're inside the tower on the first floor, as they look up, they'll see all the timber structure of the roof.
Fantastic. So this is, you're aiming for this work to be completed in October, I think, this year?
Yes.
And then opening Easter next year?
Yep, this is the culmination of about 6 years graft by myself, people in the village, other people from around the area. Say the tower's been here since the late 14th century, this Pele Tower, and it's taken us 6 years to raise all the funding to get it all restored. We've raised a good £700,000, give or take a penny or two. Extremely grateful to the Heritage Lottery Fund, of course, our main funders. But it's taken us 6 years, but we're finally getting there and preserving this small but really significant part of Northumberland's heritage.
That's absolutely brilliant. I mean, I've been involved with some of the work here as well. I've enjoyed
and we're still speaking.
And we're still speaking, yeah. And I've enjoyed every minute of it, to be honest with you. It's a fascinating site, fascinating stuff, and this is just sort of bringing it a little bit more towards fruition. So, I mean, I would say well done, Barry, to yourself and to everybody else who's doing this.
Well, but can I say, Steve, can I say to the listeners, Steve got involved when we started doing the community archaeology project. I'm an archaeologist by training, and as part of this project, we've had 2 or 3 community archaeology digs, which Steve played a really important part. He's like a JCB. he shifts the soil. He doesn't find much, but he don't half shift the soil. But no, seriously, as part of the community archaeology, we've had 50, 60 people from our local area, a lot of whom have never excavated before, helped us unearth the history of the building. We found a building that predates the tower, almost certainly the original Cresswell family home from the 12th century. It has been a ball. We've worked with local schools, the school children have been excavating, And I've done a thing called field walking with them, and we found material going back at least 10,000 years ago. So we've got a fantastic story to tell here. The Pele Tower, a key part of it. And I say, yes, all being well, we'll be open to visitors from Easter of next year.
Thanks, Steve and Barry, and hello to Lewis and the joinery team. Genuine sound effects there for radio. Well, it's time for some top timely tips for the garden. Over to you, Tom.
Yes, it's jobs for the week time, Carl. Hasn't the weather changed? My goodness, I haven't used the can outdoors, the watering can, for days on end now. Mother Nature's doing it for me, and everything's romping away in the garden, including the weeds, of course. So as we'd use the hoe on a really hot day when the land is dry, I am afraid the hoe's out for the moment for me. It's hand weeding, especially things like onions. In between the onions, that chickweed gets itself in there. Keep weeds down at all costs. I mentioned earlier pinching things out with your finger and thumb, side shoots on tomatoes and in the greenhouse on the vines. That continues, of course. And then I'm looking at the vegetables growing outside. Several weeks ago, we were celebrating picking the first lettuce leaves. They're still okay, but they're growing on a bit. And the radishes, they've been so tasty, but they're getting quite tall now. And they won't last forever. So what I'm doing is sowing for continuity. Believe it or not, about 8 days ago, I sowed some mixed salad lettuce, leaf lettuce that is, and I also put some radishes in outdoors. Within 8 days, both of them have germinated. The lettuce are in cell trays, little plugs with them in. I'll be planting them out in a few days' time, and this keeps the continuity going for me. The lettuce which have been growing and I've been picking leaves from all of this time, I can take those out once these other ones start producing, and that creates more space in the vegetable garden, keeping things going. I'm looking at the fruits out there, and they appear to be quite vulnerable to me. We've covered the strawberries in netting, and I insist that it has to be safe netting. There has to be no way in for the birds, the blackbirds I'm talking about especially, because if they get in there, they panic and they can damage themselves. So that's not fair, actually. So you've got to make it as safe as you can if you're putting nets on the strawberries. I am debating whether to put them over the gooseberries. There's a big crop this year, and of course the raspberries. I tend to, with the raspberries, just put a covering over the top, open at the sides, so they can't get every single raspberry. At least I get the lion's share. I'm also thinking at the moment about winter greens. I love to have throughout the winter period the purple spout and broccoli, those savoys, cabbages, and of course the Brussels sprouts. And this is the ideal time to be planting them. There should be young plants now to give them a fighting chance, but as we've got access to the garden centres now, they will have them in there, young plants in plug form, and they romp away once you've got them in the ground. They need protection at some stage shortly. I've seen the green-tipped white butterfly out, but I haven't seen the cabbage whites out yet, but it's just a matter of time before they appear. And if you're growing any brassicas at all, you really need to cover them to stop the cabbage white butterfly getting in, laying its clusters of eggs on the underside of the leaf, and those resultant larvae or caterpillars munching their way through your winter greens. This is a good time to be sowing things like wallflowers in open seed drills outdoors. By open seed drill, I mean out in the open there. You cover the seeds over. So back of your rake, just take a little line, a patch in vegetable garden if there's some space free. Sow them thinly at first in a drill, just about maybe 2 centimetres deep, the drill. And then sow them first thinly, and then thicken them up a wee bit, the sowings, finger and thumb from the palm of your hand, the seeds, and then Don't fully cover them or water them, of course, in the drill before you put rig back the soil, but rake it in gently from the side, just so they've got little more than a centimetre, say, of soil over the top. They will germinate, they'll grow on outdoors, and when they're something like 10 centimetres tall, 15 centimetres tall, you can transplant them to another part of the garden to grow on. So when the autumn comes, you can put them out for bedding and they'll flower next spring. Wallflowers, ideal for sowing those outdoors now, and there's quite a range of herbaceous perennials. I raise them each year, put a few pyrethrum I raised 2 years ago. They're putting on a glorious display of pink and red flowers in the garden now. So you can sow herbaceous perennials by packs to seed, sow them at the moment as well. I've got a harvest of stem cuttings in the garden, softwood stem cuttings now. Really pick some of those, soak them in a bowl to fully charge them with water, and then put them into a gritty compost in a tray with a dome on top to conserve the moisture, and they will root fairly easily for you. Well, those are your jobs for the week. Enjoy your gardening, folks.
You've been listening to the Nature Garden podcast with me, Carl Steinson, gardener Tom Pattinson, birder Tom Cadwallender from the British Trust for Ornithology, and Steve Lowe from Naturally Northumbria. Please do join us again soon and have a great week. Bye for now.